I'm going to talk briefly about the therapeutic intensive from a bit of a theoretical standpoint, and also from the angle of, how do we do it? What's actually involved? What can people expect in terms of the interaction between myself and their issues? So the first order of business, what we deal with, what we focus on in the intensive is the truth. And I define the truth my own way. I use this concept of the truth a whole lot in this work, and I have my own definition of it that I'm going to share with you. And this is basically the definition for me. The truth is what was or what is experienced in the meaningful world of the individual. So this is distinct in our common understanding of the truth as a set of facts or as a matter of facticity. You go into a court of law and they want the facts. When they say the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, they're trying to get to the facts of the case, the facts of the matter. So consider this difference between the truth that I'm talking about that has to exist inside the meaningful world of the individual, and the truth as we search for it that exists between individuals supported by agreement. And that's the notion, there's two sides to every story, and then there's the truth, and really what you're looking for there in that 2 versus 1 idea is that there's some absolute truth that would be a matter of authority or consensus. So if two people disagree, some authority could come in. If two people agree, then you don't ask the third opinion. You already have consensus. And so what happens is the truth there is established as existing interpersonally as opposed to intrapersonally. And the truth for me is an intrapersonal phenomenon. In fact, I take it a step further because I'm talking about its location in specific space-time. And so I can have an idea about my truth and want to discuss it between myself and myself as if I were separate observers, more than one observer. And think about it. What I think of my childhood when I'm a teenager is very different from what I think about my childhood and important events from my childhood as an adult. And in fact, it can change, from one day to the next. And so I'm talking to myself about the version of my history of truth from the observer standpoint, as if I were somebody else. And then I make the truth a matter of negotiation inside me, and I treat it as if it's an interpersonal phenomenon. And I need to come up with a word to describe that to satisfy my own needs for description and explanation, but I haven't thought of that yet. So suffice to say right now we have the intrapersonal truth that I'm focused on that exists in specific space-time coordinates, if you will, and requires no agreement. It has an integrity and a validity, an internal validity that can't be argued with. It is what happened for the organism at the time that happened for the organism. Later on, all sorts of spins and reports and angles and perspectives and debates and arguments, all this can surface after the fact, and that all occurs, at least in potential, interpersonally, between one observer and another. So there's inside the system in the moment that it happens, and then there's every other truth. And so this has nothing to do with every other truth. Not that those arguments and those interpersonal phenomena don't have an impact. They certainly do. But that's not the truth I'm talking about. And that's the point I need to make here. So if you think you can tell me the truth, in fact, you're wrong. The only thing you can do is connect to the truth, and then maybe show me and show yourself as you connect with it. And so what are you talking about? Doing real time travel? Well, if you think of this, and this is just a visual analogy, but if you think of the actual moment by moment experience being stored in an archive as sort of the official representation, not a note about, but the official, video, three-dimensional, four-dimensional, captured, representation, icon, isomorphic icon, the same thing as, which we like to think of videos as, even though they're absolutely not, but because it would have to be told from every potential angle, or maybe let's just say from the angle that the eyes actually were and the orientation that the body actually had at that moment. So it's a full-bodied representation. It couldn't be on film. It couldn't be two-dimensional. So that's stored in an archive somewhere. And when you talk about the book on the shelf, you're talking about the idea. When you bring the book down, you read it, you're talking about an idea. When you enter the book, you're talking about the truth that I'm talking about. So you actually enter into the experience. Now, how do we time travel like that? Well, then I get into the conversation about memories and incompletions, and we'll save that for a different time. And they realized, people may have, a spin or some subjective interpretation, and they're looking to put together the facts of the case, comparing, contrasting, and integrating what this person says happened, this person says happened, this is what happened, this is their version of the story, and ultimately they want the jury to put the fact pattern together and then draw some conclusions about the truth. This is not that kind of truth. This is not the kind of truth that the court of law is interested in. This is the kind of truth that the heart and the mind is interested in. This is the truth that I need to have access to and that you need to have access to in order for us to accomplish in this process of change what we need to accomplish. And very often this contact with the truth produces a breakthrough for people. It may seem a little counterintuitive to you right now, and maybe after this brief explanation, you'll get a sense of what it is I mean. So what do we do with the truth? What do we do about the truth? What do we do that involves the truth in the intensive? Well, the first order of business is to discover the truth or uncover the truth. Why is this the case? I asked somebody who's sitting here in front of me and they're 30-something years old, I asked them, what kind of childhood did you have? And they'll give me a very brief statement, maybe a one-word answer, maybe a short paragraph. And I'm sitting here listening to them, and I understand that this little story that they're telling about their childhood, in some respects, is far from the truth. In other words, a summary statement about your entire childhood, and it's not like I'm asking like it's a trick question. I'm trying to get a sense of the person's relationship to something important like their history. And they'll tell a story and they'll have a kind of spin to it. So one person will say, oh, I had a horrible childhood and it was filled with pain. Does that mean there were no good experiences? No, there are plenty of good experiences, but on balance it was horrible. And like, well, what leads you to conclude that it was horrible? Well, I was abused. And say, well, what kind of abuse? And then they'll have a label for that. And even after all this discussion, which could take 10, 15 minutes or longer, I'm not sitting there thinking that I have the truth or that they have the truth as it is being presented in this little narrative, in this little story. Again, I'm not looking for the facts, but I'm looking for what was or what's being experienced in the meaningful world of the individual. And so even as they're telling me about the history of experience that they had, they're experiencing something in the here and now and telling me about it this particular way. So somebody will be sitting there, for instance, and they want to be sure that they're evoking sympathy from me in response to my question. Somebody else will be sitting there and putting a different kind of spin. They'll be telling me how horrible it is, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to get me to realize or to see them as somebody who really has, fought a hard battle and is winning. Like, that was a really horrible job, and then it's followed with the justification of the rationale that's supposed to lead me to believe that despite their horrible history, they've got their act together. So think about the difference between those two people. One's talking about having been sexually abused as a 6-year-old. The other one's talking about having been sexually abused as a 6-year-old. One, in this experience, in the here and now, in their meaningful world, they're telling a story that is trying to evoke sympathy. They can portray themselves as a victim, and it's going to serve as an explanation for a lot of what's going on in their life. The other person is saying, I wouldn't go there. Yes, it did happen to me, but I just want you to know that I've done some work on this or figured it out or left the past in the past, and so it doesn't bother me anymore. But you asked me what my history was, and it has no bearing. So one person is really, in some respects, loading it up with, it's going to be meaningful as we continue to talk, that this happened to me, and the other person saying, even though the same fact happened to me, that it has no bearing on what's going on in my life, and I'm pretty clear about that, so let's not bother to go there. Do you see what I'm talking about here? In the meaningful world of this person, in the moment, the story they're telling is actually designed, it shows me something about their relationship, not just to their history, but to themselves and to me in the moment. I'm assuming that the person who's portraying themselves as a victim is not wholly a victim, but that story has served them in a certain way in their life, and that's why they tell it that way, and they expect to continue to do that, even after we interact. The other person's telling me the same sort of story, except their spin is completely opposite. What they're trying to say is it was horrible then, but it has no bearing now. That I've risen above that. I said, well, let's just get to the facts. The fact is you were abused at age 6, you were abused at age 6. Well, what good does that do us? The truth that I'm not yet getting, but the truth that I will be looking to uncover or discover, is what did it really mean to you at the time that you were 6? And then what did it evolve into? What did it eventually mean to you by the time you were 10? And now, here you sit, let's say in your 30s, and what does it mean to you today that you would tell me the story that way? And so all of that really comprises components of the truth that in this discussion we're having are not yet discovered, not yet uncovered. And then the same applies to the second person. What did it mean to you at age 6? What did it mean to you a bit later? And how is it that fact pattern has evolved in terms of how you tell the story so that you relate to it this way now? So you see the complexity of the truth. It really involves what is being experienced in the moment about your history and what was actually experienced in the history itself when it was taking place. So, well, it was so long ago, how am I supposed to remember? Trust me, if it was the least bit traumatic, those memories are imprinted. They are there and they can be accessed regardless of the amount of time that's gone by, regardless of the degree of pain that was involved, regardless of the defensive maneuvering that has taken place since then in relationship to that material. The truth is there to be had, but we need a process of discovery that has some integrity to it. And so that's what I bring to the table. That's what we're doing in the intensive. And so in order to support that process, one of the things that we're going to be doing after we discover it is we're going to be enriching your contact with it. We're going to have you make contact with it. But why do we do that? I'm not somebody that goes after feelings for the sake of having people get in touch with their feelings. I'm somebody that recognizes when we make contact with the truth, feelings will come along. Feelings will be part of that. It's one of the ways that we verify that we're connecting to the real truth, because it's emotionally loaded. Everything that was painful or traumatic in your life, by definition, has some emotional loading. If we talk about it, and we're making no contact, it may seem to be flat. It may seem to have no feeling or emotionality connected to it. And that could convince some people, therapists included, that it has only marginal or limited meaning. and that the story that I tell about it is actually accurate, or it's actually the truth. Oh, that was back then, it's no big deal, I've handled it, trust me. You have no idea how many times I've heard that as a therapist, and I just want to say, oh, bullshit. So part of what we do in terms of the use of techniques in taking this process of discovery and validating and enriching it and making it something that we can work with, we are going to emphasize you're making contact with all the emotional aspects and all the meaningful aspects of your own truth. Truth as it is or was experienced in the meaningful world of the individual. All right, so we're making contact. What else? Well, we're going to interact with your truth. So I go back to the example when I first asked people about their history. And, this is a therapy context. Obviously, we're talking about some of the painful struggles of your life and some of the painful experiences in your history. And your initial conversation shows to me the way that you're superficially interacting. I say superficial in quotes, meaning it tells me something about the relationship you wish you had, or you're trying to change in relation to your experience. It doesn't actually tell me about the initial experience, what it was in terms of the truth. But you are already interacting with it when you describe it. But I'm going to encourage you to interact with it in any number of ways that I'm recognizing are going to have some therapeutic impact. So this person over here is downplaying their truth. So I'm going to have them get in touch with it, make some contact with it, and then I'm going to have them, upplay it rather than downplay it. Meanwhile, this person over here who has, made a lifetime out of being a victim, and they didn't do this for, manipulative reasons necessarily, and it's not just attention seeking. It's factored into their way of living in a very complex and intricate sort of way, and it's meaningful to them that they live with it this way. But they're used to it being this way, and this is the only way that they've known to dance with their own truth. And so what I'm actually getting them to do at this point is downplay it. So I might ask them to tell me about it as if they were a robot. An intentional downplaying of the truth just to enrich their ability to interact with it. Now the person's given themselves permission to interact, and we can go all over the map in relation to the truth, looking at all sorts of different angles and perspectives and entertaining all sorts of considerations. So they've already been freed up at the point at which they allow there to be this interaction with. And you come to the intensive, and what we're going to find out is that as a 6-year-old, you had these, quote-unquote phobic responses that led to this learning and this conclusion, and that now you look at yourself and you say, well, there was nothing to be afraid of, so I just have this problem with anxiety, and you're invalidating now your own truth as you knew it to be, at the time in which it occurred, and at the time in which it had a meaningful impact in you, in your life, and it carried forth with this, sort of surround of confusion and self-deception, And so you're being treated for an anxiety disorder, and maybe you even think you have hypochondriasis, you're a hypochondriac. And all this was the fallout from something that actually happened and was meaningful to you at the time. We're going to uncover this in the intensive, and we're going to have you connect the dots so that you see yourself as a 6-year-old being afraid, legitimately being afraid of what was true for you, which was this was going to happen if I went to school. Your body had a response to that, and this all sort of congealed into this real troublemaking, real problem-causing, traumatic experience that you have since downplayed and diminished and no longer recognize the role that it plays or has played in your whole life. So this is the kind of breakthrough that we produce as we encounter the actual truth. I could give you thousands of examples like that. In the normal course of trying to work on this, you would be encouraged to think differently. And in fact, it would be surprising to me if you went into regular therapy and the therapist had the wherewithal to connect the dots for you to recognize that when this problem began, you honestly had this meaningful experience and drew some legitimate conclusions at the time that then became kind of written in emotional stone in your life that produced all the fallout since. We'd be hard pressed to sit around with a bunch of talking heads and say, one day at school when you were 6 years old, you actually did witness some bullying. The next day you were afraid of going to school and you developed a tummy ache. And that was the beginning of a lifetime of, being a hypochondriac. Picture the ideal therapy moment in which a person is being extremely authentic in the moment, including, having all that humility and uncertainty that goes along with that. So in the here and now, they're being authentic, and they're searching with you authentically, with deliberate and pure intention of discovery, looking at their own history to discover the authentic truth of their self in their history. So you have the authentic person today looking for the authentic reality that was. And so the truth of now is meeting up with the truth of then, and this produces magical possibilities. And actually you can do some of this on your own, but it's difficult. And part of what makes it difficult is the defenses that exist in the here and now, keeping us from being authentically who we are. All that impression management stuff, or, putting my act out there and maybe even buying that my act is my real self and being sort of doubly confused on multiple layers. But getting real about what was real, getting truthful about what was truthful, representing myself interpersonally here as who I actually am with all my, warts and blemishes, talking about all my history of warts and blemishes. So this is not necessarily a fun process. It's not a pleasant experience, but you can see, just given how rare it is, the possibility for its being extremely fruitful for the individual. And so, as an example of that, if you experienced yourself as being on the receiving end of abuse, and later somebody acquainted you with the definition of what abuse really is technically, like it's not a fact that you were abused, this doesn't change the truth for you. What it does is it informs the story that you're now telling about what took place. Because what took place at the time when it was abuse to you had the impact of abuse to you. Are you with me on this? So that's the truth. The truth is what you actually really experience in real time, real space, when something occurs for you. It has nothing to do with how we can retell the story after getting more information and putting it all together, as if now we're capturing the important description of the event. That's not the most important description of the event when it comes to the human being and the human being's suffering, the human being's emotional responding. It's the experienced truth that matters in that domain. And being phobic and being depressed and having an anxiety disorder. Really, it could start from that kind of experience. And what I'm telling you is, yes, it really, that whole life could have been hijacked by this one meaningful experience that took place, 30 years prior to your entering treatment, 30 years prior to your coming to the intensive. And we can uncover this for you. We can help you find it. And then we can help you do something with it that actually, in essence, eliminates this from your life, eliminates the influence of that kind of learning experience from your life. If you try 100 different therapy approaches, one's going to be giving you anti-anxiety medication, another one's going to be trying to correct your thoughts in the here and now. A lot of therapists will say, forget your history, you don't want to dwell on it, talk about the future and problem solve and all this other stuff. And I guarantee you they're not going to get the same result. They're not going to find the source, they're not going to uncover the truth, and they're not going to really know what to do with it when they get there. If you've already had that experience in your various therapies, you should consider doing this, because what I can say to you is that we will find this out rather quickly, and we will resolve it rather completely. If that's not really what you're interested in, then I don't know what you're doing here. After we uncover it and make contact with it, as I said, we're not interested in stirring up feelings. Feelings are only indicants that we're into meaningful territory. So if something is not meaningful to you, there's not a lot of feeling attached to it. And that doesn't mean there's no feeling, it just means it's minimal. And when something's important to you, whether it's on the upside or the downside, then there's feeling attached to it. Feeling really, the volume of feeling correlates with the size of the meaning. Let's put it that way. So one of the things we're looking to accomplish in the process of interacting with your truth is we're supporting you in taking what I call resolutionary actions. So that's a word I made up. So you can see it contains the root resolution. So what, for instance, would be a resolutionary action when it comes to grief? Any guesses? Cry. Okay, so a lot of people would think of crying, and you can interact with grief emotionally, and there'll be a lot of crying, but you could be stuck there. It doesn't really necessarily resolve it, but it does indicate that you're making good contact with it. So it's a piece of it. So what does grief involve? Just in terms of what's happening.
A letting go process.
A letting go, exactly. Resolutionary action means some form of letting go. And how good are human beings at losing and letting go?
I suck personally.
You suck personally, right?
Well,
you and about 9 billion others, because we all suck.
Well, I didn't invite them to my party. This is my party.
You and about 9 billion others.
It's hard to do.
Well, we are creatures that get attached. We don't get unattached very readily.
Is there anything in our identification with people, like your parents when they pass away? There seems to be more because they're your parents, but also there's an identification. You're not just losing the attachment. It seems there's more being lost. Like my identity, some of my identity is made up by things I've learned from my parents. The way I think about them, right?
Mm-hmm. If you lend me $5, we could say, and I don't pay you back, we could say, well, you've lost is $5.
Right.
But you may have in fact lost a friendship.
Right.
You may have in fact lost your faith in humanity. You may in fact have lost your sense of a possible future because it was based on the idea that you could trust me.
Right.
It's very hard to measure what people lose. This is what I'm saying. The truth can't be measured by the fact. The fact is you lost $5. Now that's a fact.
Right.
But that's not what I lost in my meaningful world.
Got it. That's good.
And so this is part of what makes it difficult for us to let go. We don't even know what we're hanging on to. We don't know what things meant.
Right.
At the same time, we're busy defending against the pain of it, so we're reducing in our own minds what we would like to say it means.
Yeah, totally.
This is the catch-22 of our existence. That we mess with our own truth, and then when it comes time to uncovering the truth, discovering the truth, making contact with the truth, interacting with the truth, and finding out what kind of action might produce a resolution, we've screwed ourselves because we've hidden it all from us. This is why people need the intensive.
Right, to expose those kind of things.
To expose the truth, to support you in making contact which your instincts tell you don't want to do, to encourage you to interact with it in ways which you haven't even considered, and then to find the actions that you need to take to resolve it, and then to push you to take the action. So we're not changing your thoughts so that your feelings change. We're not changing your feelings or getting you in touch with your feelings so your thoughts can change. What we're doing is we're putting you in touch with the truth that you've been avoiding or resisting or making no contact with for quite some time, to encourage, to support, to facilitate a process of having the meanings evolve. Really what's happened is arrested development. Meanings are supposed to take place, and if we're open to what they are and we don't box them up and put them on, under the bed, or lock them inside a don't go there safe, meanings evolve naturally. Who is my mother? And who she is today evolves into who she is tomorrow and who she is the next day. And then my mother surprises the hell out of me and slaps me, very uncharacteristic of her. And I'm shocked, surprised, and traumatized. And now that particular meaning gets a little bit frozen somewhere. Maybe it's in a box under my bed, and I pull it out in my dreams, or I pull it out sometimes when I'm fearful, or I pull it out, and it does scare me. I do have thoughts about her. She shows me that same sort of body posture, or some of the circumstances that happened that day, like a set of discriminative stimuli that got connected with it in a Pavlovian way. Was in the kitchen and she was cooking a certain thing right before she snapped, or she was drinking wine right before she snapped at me. And so all those things can trigger my contacting this meaningful reality, this piece of my real truth that I'm trying to run away from. I'm trying to handle in a kind of dissonance reducing way. I'm defending against. And as I relate to my mother on the sweet side, or the upside, or the quote unquote normal side, the pre-trauma side, I'm okay with her with a little uneasiness about the prospect of who she might be. And I'm clinging to the idea that she's not that, she's not that, she's not that. And then she snaps again. And now I have two pieces of resisted meaning, and they're now in the same box. I put them in the same sort of defensive box. And they speak to me a little more, and the spread of the discriminative stimuli, has increased. So there's more things that potentially trigger this uneasiness I have about my mom. And so this wonderful trust, this blanket trust that was unquestioned in terms of the love-based relationship I had with her, has now been, disturbed, and it's been disturbed in a way that I have kind of attempted to freeze these meanings. They're not exactly frozen, but they're resisted, so they're boxed. And what I mean by that is they're boundaried, and they are not well integrated with the rest of who she is to me. And so I'm living in this separated world of quote unquote normal responding in relation to my mother, and then trauma based responding. And I'm developing it's not multiple personality per se. But think about it, I've split my realities a little bit, and I'm having a hard time seeing how they integrate. And so really they're not evolving. The meaning of my mother is not evolving. I'm clinging to the, there's a great example just came to mind, and this is, clearly tragic, but the parent that loses a child that is stuck in their grief, that keeps their room intact, so that day that they lost them, that sort of frozen structure is maintained inside the reality, and we can see how stuck they are. That's the day the earth stood still for them. That's the day their meaningful world stood still for them. And this is how the defenses work. And in the smaller example of my mother, the larger example of loss of a child. Whenever there's a meaningful truth that we resist, there's a boundary operation that impedes evolution or development. Let's just put it that way. So really, when we're making this contact and we're interacting with it, we're freeing up, we're moving inside the boundary, right? So that's the first thing. The boundary was to protect the person intrapersonally from the truth, but it also serves as an interpersonal boundary. They don't tell me the truth, even if they have holes in their boundary, until I ask them. Their truth could be slipping out, manifests as their anxiety, but they're not telling me what the source of it is, even if they have an inkling. And then when they finally tell me, they're just reporting it. When we finally make the contact and we're interacting with it, we're facilitating its evolution. And this is why it's a breakthrough. Because when a person goes from being, 6 to 10 in a matter of a minute, it feels like a breakthrough. When a person goes from having a giant, ugly truth in relation to a person or something important in their life, and they can't integrate it, it's a breakthrough the moment it becomes integrated. And so in a Zen sort of way, the truth gets included rather than excluded. And in the inclusion there is the accommodation, the assimilation, there is the integration, and then there's the evolution. So it's a developmental issue. It's a learning issue. It's a learning-based problem where learning has become fixated and development and evolution has been retarded, has been impeded. And so this is a lot to get done in a couple days, but we've got the formula now.
It's groundbreaking. I mean, you did that stuff. You can get even close to those things in a few days. You move the ball so far out of the field. You gotta get there.
That's the point. Tons of movement, breakthroughs, change people's lives in a weekend. It's amazing. Can be done.
It's a tall order. It's like that's why